Everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, the Last Nighters. And Last Nighters are part of the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Tonight, we're doing a special episode 88. We're going to hit 88 miles per hour on our way to talk about Back to the Future with our friend and guest, former guest, Doc Brown, who is joining us all the way from the East Coast, so it's pretty late for him. But this promises to be a very good discussion. And spoiler alert, both Doc Brown and myself have not seen this movie in a period of time, but our illustrious co-host Robert Johnson watched it last night, so we're going to be leaning on him heavily. But this show notes and more can be found at lastnighters.com/88. That's 2 8s, and it is not a dog whistle, I promise. It's just, it happened to be the number after 87, and it will be preceding 89. Just so that's clear.
So is Bob Zemeckis a closet Hitler fan? Is that what's going on here? Is this like a Nazi dog whistle, this whole movie?
This might be before that was even a thing. I don't really know. That seems to be a rather recent libertarian infighting thing.
No, Hitler died in 45.
Allegedly.
And this movie was made in 85. This is 40 years later. I think the movie was made after Hitler died.
Right, but there wasn't the dog whistling stuff happening in 85, I don't believe. But who knows? I mean,
no, but the neo-Nazis already had like the 88 tattoos and the, I don't know, what are all those? What was that movie we did, Green Room or whatever it was, that had all that stuff?
Oh yeah. I forget what do you even call that? Like the colors?
Like they had like, you know, certain tattoos that meant things. Like if you watch a prison documentary, all the neo-Nazi gangs have certain tattoos that all signify things. I think that they predate the dog whistling stuff. Those neo-Nazi gangs have been in prison for a long time.
All right. Well,
yes, I'm right.
He must be right.
I'm not getting in this one.
All right. Well, let's introduce our friend Doc Brown. Doc Brown hails all the way from the East Coast, Puxatawny, right? And you were a guest with us for The Shining and It almost 2 long years ago. So it has been far too long, and we're having you back for Back to the Future. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and then we can get into the Google description and start talking about this movie.
Cool. I am a librarian by profession, and I am a former ghostwriter. And I have lived everywhere from Western PA to right outside New York City. So I've lived in some of the liberal bastion that makes up our wonderful country. And I don't know what else you want to know. I like to read. I am a bibliophile. I run a number of book clubs, and I also love my movies. So that's why I like you guys with your podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. It's nice to be appreciated out in the dark, cold world here. All right. Well, we appreciate having you on. And why don't we get into the Google description for Back to the Future? It came out in 1985. Fantasy sci-fi, 1 hour, 56 minutes, 8.5 on the IMDb, 96% Rotten Tomatoes, 87% Metacritic, and 96% of Google users liked this movie. They gave it a thumbs up. The description is, in this 1980s sci-fi classic, small-town California teen Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, is thrown back into the 50s when an experiment by his eccentric scientist friend, Doc Brown, played by Christopher Lloyd, goes awry. Traveling through time in a modified DeLorean car, Marty encounters young versions of his parents and must make sure they fall in love or he'll cease to exist. Even more dauntingly, Marty has to return to his own time and save the life of Doc Brown. This came out July 3rd, 1985, director Robert Zemeckis. The featured song is The Power of Love, and I believe Steven Spielberg was related to this movie as well. Robert, let's get your take, and then we'll go to Doc Brown.
Cousins. Spielberg is second cousins to Back to the Future. This movie holds up. And how? I mean, the special effects, of course, aren't gonna. It's a lot of, what they had available to themselves, of course, in 85. It was probably cutting edge at the time, and they obviously spent some cash to make them look decent, but they didn't make these movies for HD and 4K, especially. It's probably going to look even worse in 4K. But, the storytelling is so tight. This movie, it really kind of surprised me watching it again because Robert Zemeckis filmed it almost like he was filming a TV show. Like the actors say their lines, and then we cut to the next scene. And there's no crane shots, really. There's no real pauses and setting the scene and the tone, no director's flourishes, like the cinematographer, that must have been his day off or something, because it's just, here's the action, we're going to do it. Okay, moving on to the next scene. And so the pacing is really quick, and I bet you that helps it stand up to modern times, because a lot of movies these days are very fast-paced, a lot of cuts, but this isn't like rapid fire cuts, but there's not a lot of pauses in this film, like where you're just sitting there and appreciating something. We're moving along. We got a story to tell. It really respects the audience's time, and the story holds up, and it was a lot of fun. And let's say it's a great movie still. And I'm sure we're all three of us going to give it like an 8.8 and be totally lame, but this is what's going to happen. I still want to hear your final summary review, you big cheaters. But I watched it, I enjoyed it, and that's my current thoughts on the very first summary or the thingamajig. Yeah.
All right, and Doc, what are your thoughts on the description and anything that Robert has said already?
I agree with Robert completely. You have to think some of these folks that were in the movie were also TV stars. So like Michael J. Fox was on Family Ties at the time, so he was going back and forth between that TV show and the movie, and it was quite rigorous schedule for him. So I think they kind of made it a little more conducive for their actors on the show, the movie. I love it. It is full on 80s, the best of the 80s. It was fun, it was dynamic, it's funny. There was some drama in there, but not too much. There's a little bit of dark comedy in there, but not too much. There's enough dark comedy in there where Disney turned it down because it seemed incestuous when the mother fell for the son, not realizing he was her son. And opposite Oedipus Rex, I guess. And it was just cool to see the 50s culture. Back to the Future Part 2 was great to see the visions of the future for the people who made the movie. And it had an optimism to it that I think helped propel Part 2 and Part 3. It was just an overall great story. I think the acting was superb. I think everybody that was in their own roles fit the roles perfectly, whether it was Michael J. Fox as Marty, or it was the guy who played Strickland, the bald principal. He was awesome. The guy who played Biff. Crispin Glover, crazy Crispin Glover even did a great job. I think it was just an overall wonderful film in every way you can think of it being wonderful. Even the score, the Huey Lewis and the News, they did great with the soundtrack. I forget the composer who did the composing, but that was also awesome. Yeah, just a lot of fun. Brings back the 80s. I just love it.
All right. Well,
Tim, what are your thoughts, buddy? Come on, I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'm going to interject a little bit now. Now, I will admit I did not watch this movie in this decade, but it is such a cultural icon that I have perhaps not like perfect memories of it, but maybe I've embellished them a little bit. But it is one that has stuck with me, and I think that I can follow along with what you guys are talking about. Now, I do recall that they had a concept that they used, and whether the concept is like theoretically feasible or not, we don't really need to get into that. But if I recall, they are very true to staying within the theory that they present, and they don't break their world. And that is a very good feat to accomplish in a movie, because so many movies seem to break their own logic even within the same film.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A
lot
of times,
consistent.
Yeah, the movies set up a world where they got an idea for the script of what's going to happen, and then you get to the third act, and then it all falls apart. But this movie, absolutely, the stakes seem real, but they're also, they're big for our protagonist, but we care about our protagonist, so we want to see him succeed. But it's not like some giant world-ending thing. Although I think it's an interesting discussion point if we did talk about the morality of what they do, the morality of, because what ends up happening through not necessarily any fault of Marty's, of his own. Like Marty's just trying to survive, right? He gets in the car because he's getting shot at
by the Libyans,
by the Libyan nationalists,
terrorists,
and they want to, he wants to escape. And of course, he hits 88 miles an hour, and he's back in 1955. But what he ends up doing, kind of like a blundery way, he kind of blunders into his parents, and doesn't realize that he's affecting the future until Doc Brown explains it to him. But what he ends up doing is drastically improving his life in the future by changing George's self-confidence, basically. And would that be a moral thing to do? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a tough question, because you almost have to play into, okay, well, if you could go back and change things in the past, the very famous, would you kill baby Hitler? Or put another way, in The Last Supper, would you kill young Hitler, a starving artist? And Ron Perlman's character in that one says, no, you talk to the man, you try to reason with him. But yeah, like if you had the ability to go back and alter these things, I think that there would be some moral problems with that, especially like when Biff goes back and gets the sports book to know all the future scores, and then he gets rich as a result of that. That's clearly cheating, right?
I would say it's cheating for sure, but gambling is a voluntary thing, and bookies make those odds, fully accepting the risk that they could lose.
Right, but he has foreknowledge of what will be the outcome.
Right, but there's no rule saying you can't have foreknowledge of the outcome of the game.
I think that's the premise, actually.
I think it's the reality, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know the answer.
All right, and then Doc brought up the reverse Oedipus complex thing and why Disney kind of shied away from this. If I were calling that play on the field, I would call it incidental. Like it was not intentional, and it was played off for the comedic value.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think that was all that spicy at all.
You haven't watched it recently. Dude, rewatching it last night, I was like, whoa. They went here in 1985. I was pretty impressed. Lorraine really goes for Marty, like in a pretty intense way. Like she really comes on to him, like repeatedly in the movie.
Very licentious. That's true.
Oh yeah, she wants to get him alone and do stuff to him.
And she drinks liquor.
Smokes. Oh.
Yeah, but this is
all
all
played up. Scene where
it's all played up for the comedy.
Where she's getting raped by Biff. I mean, there's a lot going on in this movie.
Right,
well, by today's standards, I guess she would be getting raped because no is no, and anything else, if you continue, no matter what you do, nowadays that's considered rape. So yeah.
Well, I mean, there's no penetration, but he is absolutely physically assaulted.
Exactly. Right.
Now, do you think that you said he builds up George's self-confidence, but something must have back in the original timeline, right?
No, you don't remember this movie at all.
Man.
So in the original film, George is peeping Tomming Lorraine while he's climbing down in this tree, and he falls out of the tree, and Lorraine's dad almost hits him with the car, or it does hit him. Right. And then they take him inside, and she feels sorry for him, and they kind of build a relationship that way. But in the movie, Marty pushes him out of the way. Marty gets hit by the car, and then she falls for Marty.
Yep, it was an instinctual blunder, like was pointed out before with Robert's blundering, and he wound up taking the hit, and it was reversed. It was the Florence Nightingale effect, and he wakes up in, was it her bed or her brother's bed, just in his underwear?
Her bed, yeah, in his Calvin Kleins, in his purple Calvin Kleins.
That's right, he's Calvin Klein back in 1955.
That's right, looking good.
But then in 1885, he's Clint Eastwood.
Oh yeah, that's right. I was impressed by how tiny Michael J. Fox is.
Yes,
he looks tiny in this movie. He looks like he's like 5'3", 115 pounds next to everybody else.
Yeah, that's what he was. 5'3" and about 115 pounds. Yeah.
Oh really? I'm like right on with that.
Yeah, the reason I happen to know that is because when I was in college, I was I'm still 5'3", and I was about 115 pounds. And somebody pointed out to me, hey, we had just watched the Back to the Future marathon at my apartment with a bunch of guys. They're like, yeah, aren't you the same basic stature as Michael J. Fox? And we did some research, and Google was around then. And I pretty much fit the same mold as Michael J. Fox body-wise. So that's how I know that.
Confirmed. Robert's a genius. But no, he does. He looks tiny, especially next to the actor playing Biff. Biff just looks huge, and so it's fun. Biff is he's a pretty good villain. I will say that the movie really uses its sets, kind of almost overuses its sets. Like they obviously built this little town center of the 1955 version. And they kind of just go around in circles when he's doing his skateboarding stunts. But, I don't know how much the movie cost to make, but it still looks pretty damn good. I don't know.
Well, I mean, everything's got to kind
Of course, the DeLorean still looks badass.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and Doc, we've talked a little bit. There's a story behind the DeLorean that might be of interest in that the drug war may have been the coup de grace to kill off the DeLorean.
Entrapment by our benevolent FBI and government. So Mr. DeLorean, John, I think was his first name, right? John DeLorean?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
He got a whole bunch of celebrity investors like Johnny Carson, whatever, to invest in his business. And it wound up not being as successful as he was hoping. He started manufacturing, I think, Northern Ireland, but he was going back and forth to California. And the FBI decided to entrap the guy and say that he was trying to buy something like 220 pounds of cocaine or something. But he eventually got acquitted for it because he had a clean criminal record before that, and he had some other arguments that he could make. And the funny thing is, he never called any witnesses for his defense, but yet he was still acquitted. That's how squeaky clean he came out of all this. But with that stigma attached to him, even though he was innocent, he once quipped, would you ever buy a used car from me? Of course not, because now I have this stigma attached to me. And because of that, the DeLorean company fell through. And it's a damn shame because they wound up only making 9,000 of the cars. There wasn't the best performing car, and it had a lot of drawbacks that people were not expecting. But I think it would have continued to be produced. But for the fact that it wasn't and it stopped, that helped at least the Back to the Future franchise and made the DeLorean stand out that much more. And you have to consider, too, the DeLorean is in itself a character in the movie. And it does all the traveling and everything with the guys and the flux capacitor and all that. And I would even say the clock tower is also a character, as that clock tower has a pivotal role to play, and especially the first movie. But it plays a role in the second movie, and you see it getting, I wouldn't call it birthed, but you would see it starting to come together in part 3. There's different scenes in the third movie where they take the clock face off of a wagon, and then you see the skeletal structure of the tower being built. So between all the other characters, you can also look at the DeLorean and the clock tower as characters as well. I hope I didn't diverge too much there.
Well, I want to say, didn't the DeLorean, what was the main production year? And it was like 83, 84?
83 to 85. And they did ship from
by the time this movie came out, it was pretty much done?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say that as much as raising the profile of the DeLorean this movie does, the DeLorean breaks down a lot in this movie. So it's almost like not doing it any favors. It's like, I'm going to feature this car, but it's constantly breaking down. Do you really want to buy one? It does look really cool, though.
Travels back in time, though. Come on.
Oh, I'm not saying I don't want one. I'm just saying that, I mean, for tension's sake, I fully understand. But
last time I was in New York City, which was last month, I go to New York City once a month. I live a little over an hour outside of New York City, so I go there all the time. I saw a DeLorean and I took a picture of it. It was pretty cool. And there was like it was me and like 5 or 6 guys standing on the corner when this thing came down the street and then made the turn. And we all got our phones out and started taking pictures of it. And we were all in awe. I was like, yeah, that DeLorean, baby. Too bad they don't make them anymore. I mean, I think they do. I think they've started making them again, but it's a case by case basis. I don't know. I don't know if they're just
actual DeLorean company.
Yeah, I don't think it's the actual DeLorean company anymore because they got bought out 10,000 times by whatever. But I know that they're at least refurbishing DeLoreans. You just have to contact them and set up a schedule and stuff like that.
I'm sure it's not cheap, but
yeah,
I know that.
Oh, I know. They have it ready to go. Here's another wonderful hindrance of our benevolent government. Supposedly, one of the environmental laws that got passed regarding emissions for cars has held up production of the DeLorean. They don't want to make the DeLorean because they're worried that the law that has been in process of being passed for like 2 or 3 years now, the DeLorean won't satisfy those requirements once it passes, and then there's going to be all kinds of recalls and frustrations and things like that. So they're just waiting for this particular law, I can't remember it off the top of my head, to get passed for emissions for cars. And then once that happens, they're ready to go. So they have a factory, they have workers, they have everything.
So they're making like DeLorean classics. They're not making like DeLoreans, but updated for the modern day.
Right. They're just making, they're going to make the same DeLorean, but they're just going to have more modern amenities and upgrades and things of that nature. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like a novelty play thing. I know when they went
absolutely
bankrupt, and then I think the nail in the coffin was that faux drug bust. But Big Lots, the company, bought all of the inventory, all the parts and all of the remaining stuff. And then they were trying to sell it, I want to say mail order. I saw an advertisement for it posted online. So you could still order them, but it wasn't from the DeLorean company any longer. But it's kind of cool that they're bringing things back. I mean, nostalgia is a big thing. And like I said in the open, this is a big cultural film, and the DeLorean plays a big part in it. So I can see there being an appeal and a market for people being able to purchase a vehicle like this, not, for your daily driver, but, enthusiasts and people who have a little bit of extra money to burn, why not? I mean, it's a really cool car. It's got steel plating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually the metal that you're seeing. There's like no paint on these.
Nope.
And I guess if you got a scratch or a ding or whatever, you'd have to actually not be able to repair it, because in a traditional car, they put in like a filler material that they can paint over. But on this, it doesn't work like that. And what John DeLorean had originally intended was that you would just replace whatever panel that happened to be.
Right.
And then that would be how you'd fix your car. I think that maybe isn't like the most efficient way of doing things. And then another thing I saw when we were looking into this is that there were, I think, 2 or 3 gold-plated versions that were made as part of an American Express promotion. And one of them's, I think, in a casino in Nevada somewhere. But I mean, that would be pretty. That's big pimping right there. Having a gold-plated DeLorean, that'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think they make cars to crumple now anyway. So I don't know if that's a moot point at this point with the car industry, because they make them to crumple, so then you have to kind of replace whatever. There was something else I wanted to say too. Crap. Oh well, sorry, I forget.
Well, you had mentioned that Crispin Glover is a little bit crazy, and
Just a little.
I've seen some interviews of him in recent years, and yeah, he does seem to be on the conspiratorial bent. And I'll use this as an adjunct into, there are videos out there about 9/11 being foretold in the Back to the Future franchise. And Robert, I think I shared this to you, and this must have been 10 years ago. And it is actually kind of compelling stuff. Like at the very end of the first movie, when the clock tower gets struck by lightning and the car hits 88 miles an hour and disappears going through the movie theater, there's the tire tracks that are in flames. And then there's this like car repair shop with a neon sign that is like a couple of arrows that forms a 9. And then the 2 tire tracks are an 11. And then there's a couple of other things related that they call, as evidence in this kind of wacky YouTube video. But I think that these are interesting angles to take on this.
I guess. I didn't know that. I didn't know any of that. That's interesting. I'll have to go back and look. I mean, I remember the flames. So.
Well, there's also the Twin Pines, and then the Solitary Pine, or the One Pine, was it?
It was Twin Pines, and then after Marty got done doing whatever, it was the Lone Pines. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I forget all the different connections they make in that film, but I mean, you could probably spin all kinds of connections out of anything, but I don't know. It almost seems like there's something there.
I'll go along with it.
But yeah, Daniel, what else do you got to say about this?
Well, let's talk about...
Uh-oh, I can't hear him.
I can hear him.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Robert, can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Good. All right. So, where do we want to go with this next? The budget apparently was $19 million.
It hit 200 million. I saw a stat saying, or no, maybe it was, I don't know. I came across it somewhere saying, for all the movies that have hit the $200 million mark at the box office, this was the slowest to get to the $200 million mark. It was 2 weeks slower than My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which is in second place, something like that. Yep.
Well, that is interesting.
It was a sleeper hit. I guess I would call that a sleeper hit. Yeah.
Had longevity.
Yeah, definitely. Well, also, the first movie, if you went to go see in the theaters when it debuted, there was no to be continued. The creators decided it only had to be one film, but there was such a clamor for more, they wound up doing part 2 and then part 3. They did part 2 and they realized, well, we can tie everything back together again if we do part 3. Just coming from the bookish world that I tend to reside in, one of the things that everybody most appreciates about the Harry Potter books, which are by far the greatest literary things to happen in the past 20 or 30 years, is the fact that she ties everything up so nicely in her series. Back to the Future, everything ties up so nicely in the series, and there's a lot of details. You just keep poking around, you just keep seeing more and more every time you watch it, and they do a great job of tying it all together, and there's no loose ends really. There's not like, oh, well, what about this, or this doesn't seem right with compared to the first one to the third one. There seems to be a disparity, but there really isn't, because they tie it all together somehow. You just have to look at the details. There's a lot of details. We could go the proto-Trump route and talk about Biff Tannen in part 2. They what's the word? They molded Biff's character in part 2 off of Donald Trump, because at the time the Atlantic City craze was going on. That's when they were trying to bring back Atlantic City. It was in the pits, And then they did a rejuvenation project, and Trump was out there saying, yeah, I got my Caesar's Palace, Trump Tower casino thing now, which folded, I think, 10 years ago. And they decided to run with it. That's why Biff has blonde hair. When Marty McFly goes up to the entrance of it, and he's looking at that little video of how Biff made his millions, that kind of falls in line with Trump's history. So it's kind of like how The Simpsons kind of predicted Trump would be president. The guys that created Back to the Future thought they would have a few laughs and say, yeah, what if Trump became a tin pot dictator of this little Hill Valley area? Little did they know that he would be in charge of the whole country. But there you go. And I think he kind of rules the country the way he kind of ruled Hill Valley and Back to the Future too. Like, he's not well liked. People get on him about his character and his demeanor and all that sort of thing. So I think they did a good job at portraying Trump.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And you mentioned that Simpsons thing. I've seen that the clip from The Simpsons where he's going down the escalator and waving, and there's people there, and they're like,
yep.
There's all these like elements in it, like a kid's got a balloon or something, and then they show actual footage of that thing happening 15 years later, and it's like 20 different things line up exactly, which is really kind of eerie and weird,
isn't it? I think they call the casino, if I'm not mistaken, in part 2, they call the casino Biff Tower, if I'm not mistaken. As a spinoff of Trump Tower, which existed back then.
Right. Yeah. And then another premonition for Trump was Rage Against the Machine had a video they shot, and there were people holding up Trump for president signs in that video.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And that one was shot on Wall Street. It might have been Bulls on Parade, but don't quote me on that.
Hey, was that the music video with Michael Moore?
Maybe.
That's like back in like 2000.
What?
Yeah, it was a pretty long time ago.
Wow.
It's like where Michael Moore like stormed into Wall Street and like shut down like one of the trading centers for like a hot minute before the cops checked him out.
Wow, I didn't know that. I have to go back and look myself.
Yeah, well, we'll find all these weird, obscure YouTube videos that we're talking about, put them on our show notes page at lastnarrative.com/88. I think, if anything, those will be fun to watch.
Well, we all live in the Matrix, so none of this makes sense.
Yeah, there you go. There's a ton of stuff that you can get out of the Back to the Future franchise that ties into other things. So, for example, we keep talking about the DeLorean, which is center front stage, but they originally instead of it being a DeLorean, they figured it would be a refrigerator. That would be the time machine. And after a few drafts, they decided to get rid of the refrigerator. But as a bit of a funny joke, they did the whole refrigerator routine shtick with Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls. So I don't know if you saw that movie when he's at the nuclear site where they set off the bomb. And he's like, oh, crap. And he just closes himself off in one of those old Frigidaires, and he goes shooting across the desert. That was what they were anticipating on doing with the original time machine, supposedly, somehow. I don't know the details about it. But
you're telling me that there's a fourth Indiana Jones movie?
Yeah. There's, what was the first one? Temple
Sacrilege.
Yeah,
I don't think so. Sir.
Yeah.
No.
The Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple Doom. There was
Last Crusade, and then that was the end of the movie series. That's how they wrapped it up.
No, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. What's that kid's name? Shia LaBeouf or whatever. And they brought back his love interest from the Ark movie.
Are you just making this all up off the top of your head?
I know. I saw it. Nobody talks about it because it kind of sucked. It was pretty bad. In terms of Indiana Jones movies, I would rate them all out of 10 stars. I would rate them all like 9. I would rate Crystal Skulls like 4. And it still involved Nazis. Cate Blanchett played the villain, which doesn't make any sense.
I'm not convinced, but it's possible that you're telling the truth on this.
Well, Daniel, you've got your computer right there. Pull it up real quick. Or do you want to not?
Maybe it's a fan film? Maybe?
Well, I can assure you, Doc, that Robert is fucking with you.
Let me tell you something. They're making a number. They're in the works to make a number, if you can believe this, a number 5.
Yeah, just like the Rambo 5 is coming out this fall, I think. And
that looks good.
Yeah, that actually does look good. And then the new Top Gun looks pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know. Are you guys going to go see that?
Well, what is with the 80s movies coming back with all the original stars? I don't know if I'm on board with all this. I'm okay with The Matrix, maybe.
But the Matrix the first Matrix was perfect as is. Like, no need to remake that. Yeah. And it also...
Well, they're not remaking it. It's a continuation, supposedly. It's Matrix 4.
Okay, all right.
Supposedly. With Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss. I don't know about Lawrence Fishburne, but at least those two.
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh, he's in everything, so I don't.
And then one of the Wachowski sisters
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But
is this going to be a prequel or something like that? This new
I
one they're
don't-
thinking of doing?
I don't know.
well, they kind
I
of
don't
have
know.
to,
I just-
don't they?
I-
At this point, like
just-
it ended, did it not?
How much does nostalgia get you? Does it get you the millions? Because we're doing Rambo, we're doing Top Gun, we did Lion King, we did Aladdin, I mean, we're doing The Matrix.
It's just a quick way to make money. Just a quick. It's a rotten thing to do too, in my opinion.
I don't know. I guess people get value out of it, or else they wouldn't go see these things. But
No, the one that I am looking forward to is Bill and Ted 3.
oh, that's right. We're also doing that.
And they have Death coming back in that one, but I don't know what they're going to do because Carlin's dead. So I don't know what they're going to do for the other guy. So
Maybe they can
Have to
deep
see.
fake him.
yeah, maybe. Who knows? With technology, they can do all kinds of things nowadays.
Yeah, have you seen that Tom Cruise deepfake with Bill Hader? That's creepy.
No.
Oh, it's unsettling. Unsettling how smooth it is.
Well, all I know is I'm glad I was a kid in these. I think that seems to have been like a peak pop culture wise. I'm not saying everything went downhill after that, but it seems to have definitely been a high. And it shows because, like you guys are saying, they're bringing all this 80s stuff back, in some way, shape, or form. I mean, even things like the G.I. Joe movies and Transformers and all that, like everything right now, Ready Player One, the book, which was then made into a movie. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I don't know if it's just let's get the 80s out of our system because we haven't looked back at it in a while. Maybe they'll do the same thing with the 90s, but I don't know how.
Yeah, I don't know if the 90s are going to have the same nostalgia value.
Or
I mean,
the
maybe with
zeros.
Pokemon and stuff like that, but I don't know about a lot of that 90s stuff was really bad.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I think the 80s might have been it. Like after the 80s, not that great. I mean, when you think of the 80s, you think comedy for one. You had Ghostbusters, you had Back to the Future, you had Caddyshack, you had the National Lampoon was big. Chevy Chase, John Candy. You had all these great guys. Rodney Dangerfield was in his prime then, I think, right?
Sure. Yeah. Back to School.
Yeah, and that's when Saturday morning cartoons really came into the fore. And after that, I mean, you can look at different, they're more like outliers though in the 90s. Yeah, there was this one little thing here and one little thing there, but for the most part, the 80s was just all hot stuff and big time stuff that's lasted with us. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, every generation's got their nostalgia of when they were kids, bringing stuff back to when they were adults. But having lived through both the 80s and the 90s, I would say that the 80s are objectively better.
Oh yeah,
that's just I don't know. I enjoyed a lot of the 90s, but I don't think it aged well compared to the stuff in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, anything that you look at, even like politics, Reagan was a character in and of himself. Speaking of which, to get back to the Back to the Future movie for just a second, the scene where Marty meets Doc for the first time back in the 50s, and he's like trying to prove to him that he's from the future, and he goes, "Who's the president?" It's Ronald Reagan. He's like, "Ronald Reagan, the actor." Supposedly Reagan loved that so much they had to like go back and restart the film before that scene because he was laughing so darn hard. But yeah, you had the Cold War ending. There's like a dud. You had like H.W. Bush in the 90s, who nobody remembers. You had Clinton. The only thing he's remembered for is Monica Lewinsky, which is not a positive thing. It was just the 80s. There was meat, there was substance there, no matter where you looked. Not so much in the 90s or after.
Well, and in the 90s, I don't know about a lot of things, but a lot of the 90s was when they started using some really clunky CGI. Clunky CGI that has not aged and will not age. I mean, and then you got a lot of, I don't know, people really read a lot of comics like I did in the 90s, but that was when everything was extreme.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, everybody had like all these little packs on their uniforms. They all had like 50 guns, and they're all lugging around all this crap. And it was just crap. It was extreme for the sake of being extreme, not because it fit the character or made any sense to the story. So nobody, I don't think, really looks back on that with a lot of nostalgia, like they do with, say, like Ghostbusters or something like that. Just classic stuff that exists in the universe they create and makes sense and entertains you, or Back to the Future.
Yeah, they didn't have that CGI. So, I mean, I think the only, to me, one of the only CGI movies that worked in the 90s was Jurassic Park. I was blown away by that when I saw that. I was like, wow, this is great. But they also used a lot of robotics. But in the 80s, that seemed to be the peak of special effects. I mean, you had Alien. You had one of my favorites of all time, John Carpenter's remake of The Thing, which was all kinds of gore. You had the Freddy Krueger. That was a funny slasher, but at the same time, there was great makeup job there. What they did with killing people. I mean, yeah. And then now you have CGI is better. You have Avatar and all that. I'll give them credit where credit is due. But yeah, the '90s, it was just starting out, and it's just horrible. Like you look at something like The Lawnmower Man, and it's like, oh my god, oh, I didn't come up with something. Use that.
I will agree with you that CGI is objectively looks better than something that you have to make by hand. But I will say that from a storytelling perspective or a creative director perspective, when you can just put anything on the screen that your imagination wants to put on versus having to come up with some creative solution to a problem of not being able to put everything you can put on, I think you're going to come up with far more interesting films when you have to work within limits.
Yep.
When you can just, like, there's so many, I mean, like when, for example, you brought up Ready Player One. Well, Ready Player One just has like a million things on screen at any given time. And sometimes when you just flood the entire screen with a million things, it loses all meaning. You know what I mean? Like Jurassic Park, when they use CGI and they, really had to make that T-Rex and all that. I mean, they like milked it for every bit that they could, right? Because, this thing's really expensive. We got to really make use of this thing, make it effective. Whereas, CGI is getting so cheap and whatever now that, you can just be like, oh, well, don't worry about that. We'll CGI it later. Don't worry. And then you've got actors reacting to nothing. So giving wooden, performances. I'm a fan of CGI when it's done really well, and it's getting better, but it's still a process that is maturing.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So anyway,
I like nostalgia for me, but I like the CGI now. But it's just when it's something real, like even a robot or something, I find that more appealing because it seems more flesh and blood. Not so much video game or something like that. That's it's like a different medium.
It's kind of ironic that you think the robot is more flesh and blood.
Oh, you can watch. Well, you could watch The Thing today, and I think it still holds up. You could watch Back to the Future today, and it still holds up. I'm
a big horror movie fan. I've had cousins and whoever and younger friends. We sit around and watch stuff that they haven't seen. They haven't been exposed to the stuff from the '80s, and they're more scared from The Thing and even like Freddy Krueger, even though that's more of a funny thing. But they just haven't been exposed to that sort of flesh and blood, I don't know another way to put it, makeup style and special effects that you just don't get. It's almost not cartoonish, but it's almost like a cartoon with the CGI. It's a different realm, and they're just not used to it, and they're actually more scared from what I've experienced. But what do I know? That's anecdotal evidence, and that's not real evidence anyway. That the '80s still has strong staying power, and I'm glad that Back to the Future was made before CGI. I guess there's a couple scenes where do they use CGI at all in any of the films? I'm thinking if anything,
compositing.
Yeah, maybe part
but
3.
They don't. I don't know.
A couple scenes.
Yeah.
I know that when they were doing like the hoverboard scenes, that was all wires and whatnot, and they had a really difficult time with that. And they would have preferred CGI because of all the crap that they went through to get the scenes right. But at the same time, they're looking back on it, they're happy that they didn't have CGI, and they're happier that they went with the wiring, because that just made it that much more visceral, I guess, much more realistic. But my favorite.
You got to work within constraints. Right. When you actually have to do a thing for real, you have to work within constraints, and the audience is along board with that ride. Whereas if it's just some CGI thing, a cartoon, you're just like, well, okay, but you know what I mean? Like the actor actually has to react to the situation they're in, and you can see the look on their face and you can feel it. Yes. Whereas, you know what I mean?
Like I just saw John Wick was in theaters, and there was a lot of CGI in that. I don't know. Well, in one scene, he falls off a building, and the fall you can just tell is complete CGI, and it's horribly done. And then when after the fall, like you just said, there's a disconnect, and he's trying to get into that role. He's trying to get into that particular moment, but he's having a harder time than if he actually would have done a fall where there would be like even though you wouldn't see it, there'd be like a cushion at the bottom of the strings and that would be dropping him and all that kind of stuff, because at least he went through that. Whereas, you have to use your brain more to try to get into that role, that out of body experience, so to speak. And it's more difficult. And you're right. You do see that on the screen. And but like you said, CGI is coming along and all that. So I'm sure they'll get to a point where it's satisfactory for just about everybody.
Well, it's still a maturing technology. It will get better. I don't know if the CGI that's getting made today is going to look like shit in 30 years.
Right.
We'll have to wait and see. But I'm sure it will continue to be able to get, the CGI faces to emote properly and to really reflect that. I just don't know if they can get the process where, you just can't endanger an actor necessarily, like with all the crazy things that actors, the characters get put through.
They are doing a good job with making characters look different than they are. So, for example, in the Captain America film, when he's all scrawny and everything before he gets all beefed up in the lab, that was pretty convincing for me. And then, like, another example would be, I don't know if you guys saw the movie The Case of Benjamin Button starring Brad Pitt, where he is born old and then he becomes younger as he gets older. Brad Pitt was like 45, 50 or something like that in the film, but there's points where they have to make him look like he's 15 or 16, and they did a great job with that. So in some respects, they're already at that level, whereas other aspects they're not, but they're coming along.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What were you going to say, Daniel?
Well, I was going to say just anecdotally, and Doc, I think it is actually like half decent evidence. It can't be your entire argument, but personal experience does play a role. And I was a bit of a photographer back in the day, and I noted that there was a significant difference in my approach to how I would frame shots and what I would be willing to take photographs of, depending on whether I had film, which had a very limited amount, and whether I had a digital card where I could take hundreds of shots, thousands of shots. When you do have to work within constraints, you have to conceive of what you're trying to accomplish and take into account many more factors to make sure that what the end result is going to be what you're going for. When I could just shoot on, rapid fire digitally, I would liberally shoot and occasionally get something that was really great, but I would have to sift through thousands of not so great, discard. And it created a whole new workflow problem on the back end, because instead of having, a couple of rolls of film to work with, now I had thousands and thousands of images to scroll through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it definitely changed what types of shots you get as a result. So, working with constraints, I think, can be a really good thing, and it can kind of focus you in a more creative way, get those creative juices flowing, and having that kind of be a driving force in your process, I think yields a better product as a result.
I agree.
Here.
All right. Well, I said something of substance, but let's get back to the Future a little bit. Robert, seeing as you're the one who's seen it most recently, but Doc Brown, you've seen it thousands of times. Are there any points that you would want to cover before we start doing the wind down on this episode?
Well, I took very few notes because I was just enjoying the film, and there really aren't a whole lot of things to nitpick about, like, Morty. I know it's Rick and Morty, but Marty is obviously changing the future with his actions, but he's doing it in a kind of bumbling way. And really, once he learns that he's affecting the future, then he's just trying to survive. So I don't necessarily think he's an immoral actor in anything he's doing. He's not trying to screw up the world, but still his actions have consequences, and he does end up negatively affecting the lives of other characters in what he does. So I wouldn't say that he's blameless either. But as an audience member, of course, we root for him and we root against the villain because, of course, Biff's a big jerk. But I have this one note about it. Right when we first meet George and Biff, they're arguing about an accident where Biff borrowed George's car, got in an accident, and then brings it back to George's house and is like, "Hey, this is your fault. You never told me that there was a blind spot in the car."
Uh-huh.
And then he's arguing that, George's insurance should cover it because it's George's car. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all, but it's just clearly that Biff is in the wrong about this. I don't think the audience is at all convinced by anything Biff says.
Well, that's part of a good rhythm to the story, too, the whole franchise, because later on in the movie, he does the same thing regarding his homework. And he's like, "How come you're not doing my homework, or you're not doing it well?" And his dad, Marty's dad, is like, "Well, I got these other things going on, and I'm doing his manuscripts for sci-fi books and whatever." And Biff's like, "Come on, butthead, get it together."
Yeah, it just shows that they haven't changed in 30 years.
Yeah. I got a question for you guys. And this is a big debate that I've come across on Facebook many times. I've been called an evil person for this, so I want to get your opinions on this. Let me know if you think I'm evil.
Sounds juicy.
Flying cars, right? Do you think, even if they were being made now, that they would be feasible? And what I mean by that is just one example, insurance. So, for example, I just got a new car a couple months ago, and I had originally told my car insurance company that I had a certain model, and then I had told them that was the wrong model. So I told them that it was a 4-door car, but I then realized, oh, it's a 2-door. So when I told them that, my insurance went from X amount to X plus Y amount, just because it had 2 less doors. Because I guess they figure it's more sporty, so you're going to be a little more aggressive when you drive. I don't know the logic behind it. Maybe you guys do. But if there's a significant difference, it was about a 25% difference in my coverage just for the fact that there's doors. What if this thing can go off the road and go flying through the air? When insurance, not just for cars, go up, but insurance for other things like home insurance go up, because if somebody has an accident up in the sky, they're going to crash through the roof of the house and kill people and whatever. Wouldn't it be logical for insurance companies to charge astronomical rates per month with a flying car? Now, I've been told, that's crazy. How dare you? You're anti-progress. I'm like, no, I'm not anti-progress. I'm just trying to figure out the practicality of it. And for example, the insurance, wouldn't it be skyrocket through the roof costs just to have a flying car just for insurance purposes? What do you think?
Well, I would say, got multiple thoughts from what you were talking about. I don't know if I'll hit them all. I'll probably forget a few of them as we're talking. But I will say that the average consumers, what the average consumer thinks is feasible is always way underestimates the market. There's always some genius who comes along and figures something out that the average person would just be like, what? Really? Are you serious? So flying cars, of course, I think it's just inevitable. And I think it's probably going to be a system where they're going to be mostly on autopilot, if not entirely. So I think that they're going to be proven very, very safe, and the insurance premiums aren't going to be that high. I think it's going to be a lot like anything else, where it's going to be a very normalized thing. But there's obviously going to be some growing pains, and then the first auto flying car that crashes, it's going to go headlines, and then the first person that dies, and then auto flying car is going to be massive headlines.
Yeah.
But then those same headlines, like we've said in the past on this show, never also mention the number of people that die every day driving cars on government roads. So,
yep.
So I think it's an inevitable thing. I think it's going to get to the market's going to bring the price down to the point where the average person is going to buy one, and it's going to vastly improve people's lives. We're going to get off government roads, and we can finally put that dumbass argument to rest that who will make the roads? Well, we were not going to need roads, you assholes.
Yeah, that's one of the greatest lines in this movie, where we're going, we don't need roads. And I think that's
right.
That's basically my
line.
bumper sticker mantra for my whole philosophy, where we're going, we don't need roads. And, in a way, part of your question makes me think of, well, we have aircraft now, and air travel is, by all accounts, statistically far safer than any other. But then you'd have a proliferation of additional people, flying vehicles, whatever. But I think if the government got out of the way, then we'd already have flying cars, probably right now.
Oh yeah. We would have had them probably a while ago.
Right, and then we would adapt to it, and whatever the market would yield would create a more beneficial solution to what we have now. Like Robert was saying, there's something like 40 or 50,000 automobile accident deaths per year. Countless time is spent in traffic congestion. It would be far more efficient to have an unconstrained. See, and the irony of this is that we were just talking about how you have to get more creative when you are constrained, but here we are talking about removing a constraint that is an artificial constraint, preventing progress from actually happening, providing more and more value, improving the standard of living for everyone involved. But yeah, this movie, it shows us the first flying car in 1985, right? I mean, other than Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Love Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Yeah, I think this movie is a little more realistic, even though they call it sci-fi. I mean, take the time travel out of it. I think the flying car aspect is more realistic than in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Yeah, what did that car fly on? What was it? Was it Flubber? No, what was it?
Yeah, no, it was, I forget. But Flubber was also the Flubber movie. The guy who made Flubber, he was able to fly his car because of Flubber. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what Chitty Chitty Bang Bang flew in. I think it was just magic or something like that.
Just good vibes or something.
Good vibes, yeah.
Right, and then the outrage in the headlines, like you were talking about, Robert. We've already seen this with the self-driving vehicles, and whenever there's like something that happens, it's a huge story. But then you don't hear about, well, compared to the equivalent amount of road miles on regular vehicles, it's actually, X% safer.
Yeah, and there will still be a desire or a need for roads for a long time. I think if you watched the Logan movie, there are those self-driving semi trucks. Mm-hmm. That might still be the most efficient, way to transport those goods. It might be. I don't know.
They already have those.
So yeah, there you go. So those will still need to be there. It'll be a gradual period, and then eventually it'll become the most efficient way for everything, and we can leave these stupid government roads behind. It'd be great.
I know Back to the Future 2, they had a lot of visions for envisioning of technology in the future, and we haven't done all that, but we have done a lot. Hoverboards are a thing, and not the hoverboards that are on two wheels, but they actually have hoverboards now.
Right.
They just haven't been put out on the market yet, I think, because of government regulations, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, and the auto lace-up thing, I think that those are somebody actually made those. I don't know which brand was it, Converse or Adidas or someone like that.
Yep. And they have, it's not mechanical, but now they have like waterproof shirts and shirts that dry real quick, and clothing and whatnot. They have shrinking clothing. They have all kinds of stuff. Yeah. It's pretty darn cool. Now, if we can just get the weather right. Okay, it's going to stop raining in 3, 2, 1, done. That'd be good.
Yeah. Now, were you guys aware of the baseball playoffs in 2015 and how the Cubs were in position to almost fulfill the prophecy foretold in the Back to the Future franchise?
I forgot about that. Thank you for reminding me. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that movie, it's weird. It went 30 years into the future, and then looking back, because the cultural differences between 85 and 55 were so great.
Oh yeah.
But it doesn't seem like the same. I mean, if you look back at the 80s, the culture looks quite different, especially compared to today. But since I've lived through it, it seems like such a gradual shift. It doesn't seem like it is that much of a difference. But I guess looking back, it really is quite a bit. If you look at some of these people in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Would you guys like to go, if you guys got transported back to the 1950s, would you be okay with that? Like, and you couldn't get back. Would you be frustrated, or would you be like, I can handle this?
I mean, I do the best I can. I'd invest in all the right things.
I know you're not raging feminazi, so you're not like, oh my gosh, women are oppressed.
The patriarchy.
Actually, it's interesting. Yeah, I run a lot of books, and I've been a part of other book clubs. And we read a book, I don't remember which book, but it took place in the 1950s. And the book club was made up of all women except for me. So the meeting had about, I would say, 20 people. And somebody else, not me, but I was thinking it, mentioned that how the 1950s was great. And she had said, the culture was great. The cars were beautiful. The clothing was great. The hairstyles, food tasted better back then. Without so much preservatives and whatever. And these women just ripped her apart. How could you think that way? Women, we're still stuck in the home. We have to wear dresses. We have to live with our husbands. It's like, oh, crap. That's not the right way to think. But I could be wrong.
That is the perpetually oppressed viewpoint.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how many millennials have seen at least Back to the Future 1. And I'm wondering how many that have not would freak out and do the whole censure thing and not want it to be shown wherever. Like, for example, I work in a library. What would happen if the library decided to show Back to the Future Part 1? I wonder how many people would come out of the woodwork and say, you can't be showing this because it makes women look bad and everything else.
Yeah, it really is a weird thing, that the nature of changing morals, or I guess, I don't know what you call it, just perspectives, where all of a sudden something that was fine yesterday is all of a sudden horrifically immoral and oppressive and terrible and shouldn't be shown to children today.
Yeah. Although you can have drag queens give story time now libraries, and that's supposed to be praiseworthy.
Yeah, not your library though.
Not my library yet.
Or what, 9-year-old drag queens stripping for adult men or something?
That are naked.
That's something to be celebrated, but
it's pretty bad.
Yeah, well, to answer your question, Doc, I would not go back to the 1950s. I think that the standard of living is so immensely better in present time that I would, and this is me playing my pansy card, I would suffer not having air conditioning and Wi-Fi and access to information and communication and being able to, travel somewhere more quickly and all of those things. I've gone on the tour of James J. Hill's house in St. Paul, Minnesota, and they talk about how he was one of the richest men in the world at the time, and he was so rich that he had these dual functioning lights in his house. They could run on electricity, but also on kerosene or something like that, because electricity was so like sporadic. It would go out all the time or whatever. And that was just over 100 years ago. I mean, his house was, I think, built in 1912 or something like that. And, we live so much better in just the average home today than the richest guy did 100 years ago.
Well, you would never know that from the pop culture narrative.
Well, of course not. Of course not. But you also wouldn't know that, world poverty has been cut in half in the past 20 years.
I thought it was more than that. Isn't it down like 7% world poverty or something?
It's something like that. But the point is, you're never going to hear about the good news in the mainstream media, because that's not what sells. That's what gets taken for granted and allows people to, I don't know, agitate for more or be perpetually oppressed and always feeling like they're the victim and needing to demand things of others. And, it's kind of one of those catch-22 situations. Like, the better that life gets for people, the more free time they have to agitate for more things without appreciating what they do have and how much better their life is than it was in a prior generation or 2 generations back.
Oh yeah, we see that all the time with anything, like everyday stuff. Like if somebody's trying to get on a website and it takes 10 seconds for this website to load because of the connection speed or whatever, people are freaking out, not realizing that back in 2000, if you had a website load in 10 seconds, you were like, holy crap, that was fast,
What blows my mind is that I've got several friends, and I love them to death. I don't mean to piss them off, but they don't listen to the show. It's fine. Who, enjoy the fruits of technology every day. It makes their lives immeasurably better all the time. But yet at the same time, will bemoan the march of progress of technology, saying how invasive it is and how it's everywhere, and how they wish they could just get away from it. And I understand it's like, invading all areas of your life, and maybe you should step back from that, not stare at a screen 24 hours a day. I completely get that. But that's the different, to say that, yes, it's getting too invasive, but then also say we should just get rid of it and not appreciate it for what the good things that it does is disappointing.
Oh, yeah. It's this chasmic hypocrisy at the same time.
Yeah, because nobody bemoans the need to go, how do you spell that thing? And go find a dictionary. Nobody's pining for those days.
No. Or when you get into a debate on Facebook, it's all about definitions. Well, I got to know what you mean by. And then I tell people, well, I need the definition found in the dictionary. Just look up the dictionary. They're all like huffing and puffing. I'm not going to spend time typing in to a Google search the definition of a word. I'm like, really?
I'm not going to take 6 seconds. I can't do that. My time is valuable, sir.
I don't do that anymore. I used to, here's an article reader. Here's a 3-minute YouTube video. I used to all the time. Here's a Tom Woods lecture video that's like 5 minutes long. I don't have time for that. If you can't explain it to me in 2 sentences, you don't have a convincing argument. I'm like, really? Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. I do feel the pressure myself, though. I feel like that my time is a very scarce resource these days, and it is difficult to allocate them to things such as watching Back to the Future in the most recent period of time. And I even was going to watch it at 2x speed because I have it available to me on YouTube, and I can watch things at that speed. That's how I watch or listen to most lectures or Tom Woods episodes, things like that. And I just become accustomed to it. And it's kind of bizarre because like I can keep up mentally with most of it. I mean, if I listen to Jordan Peterson, I have to slow it down a little bit or someone like that, but usually 2x speed. But I, on the other side, speak rather slowly, unfortunately. But back to the original question, yeah, I would hate being back in the 1950s, other than for maybe, just the novelty of checking it out for a very short period of time, and then returning back to my present time, where the picture of my family is not erased, and I have reset and realigned things so that my family ended up in a better position than they otherwise were, just like Marty McFly did by the end of Back to the Future 1, even though he stumbled through it.
Okay, Daniel, that's Daniel's answer. My answer is probably kind of like Daniel's answer, but while I'm back in the 50s, I would enjoy the hell out of it. I would get famous for being like a Nostradamus type of guy.
There you go.
I mean, I would know all kinds of stuff. I could predict the future on all sorts of things.
And you don't have a sports almanac to incriminate you.
I wouldn't even have a sports almanac. I wouldn't need one. I could talk about just inventions that haven't been invented yet and blow their mind.
Would you invent rock and roll like Marty McFly did?
Ooh,
that's pretty bad.
Your kids are gonna love it.
You're gonna love it, man. Yeah. Anyway, it's a great film. Great film. Everybody should watch it if they haven't. I'm sure everybody's watched it a couple times.
All right. Well, let's do our summary and review. I think we're about that time, and we sort of talked about this movie a little bit, and we'll go with you, Robert, and then Doc Brown.
So, like I said, Back to the Future is a film that you can watch probably every year until you die and enjoy it every time. Like all the greats, it really cared about the story, the writing, and then everything else was, just fell into place. So the acting was excellent. Michael J. Fox was at probably the peak of his powers, or maybe just before the peak of his powers. I mean, he plays a 17-year-old. I don't know if he was actually 17 at the time. He was a little bit older than that, but he did a great job. He's got a lot of charm, He's just like a little guy you root for, and the story is just tight, and the movie respects your time. It's very quick. There's not a lot of wasted time, or there's no like plot points that don't go anywhere. Everything that happens for a reason. It's refreshing. You get used to that not happening, and then you watch this and you're like, oh, this is what movies could be. It's weird that this movie is, 34 years old now, and yet it's still so good. Maybe I sound like some old fart talking about the good old days, but this movie really holds up. And I'm gonna give this movie an 8.8. But you assholes, you're not allowed to copy me because I'm just the original cool guy.
All right, very good, Robert, and very cliche in the scoring department, but that's just totally fine. You knew that was baked in the cake when when this was going to be episode 88. Doc, your thoughts on the final summary and review and your score.
It's one of the greatest movie series franchises of all time, in my opinion. It's got sound narrative. It's got fulfilling characters. It's fun. There's no agenda. Feel good thing. Yes, there's some downs in the movie throughout, but overall, it's feel good. It's uplifting. It was ahead of its time in some regards. I don't know how many people have seen the latest Avengers movie, but in that movie, they go back to the original movie and some other movies and take care of some things in order to get the plot going. And Back to the Future, the franchise may have been the first one to do that, where characters go back to previous scenes in previous movies in order to further the plot along. It was ingenious. It was creative. It was visionary. It's created a cult following that has parties across the country with tens of thousands of people in attendance. It's comedy, it's sci-fi. There's something there for everybody. The characters were extraordinary. The people who played the characters did an excellent job. Brought nostalgia. It showed the best of the times that it took place in, the 50s, the 80s, and the optimism about the future. I think it promotes capitalism to an extraordinary degree. And I also think it promotes libertarianism in terms of allowing people to make their own choices and decisions and dealing with the consequences of those decisions. And I just think it deserves at least a 9.3.
All right, upping the stakes here. Well, those are both very good summaries and reviews. And I'm going to have to dust off my memory banks on this because, again, and I admit this, I'm a bit hypocritical being a movie critic who hasn't watched this movie in about a decade. But it is one that has very, very many memorable scenes, and it does stick with you. It is a cultural icon. It is a lot of fun to think about in the past. And I think that, as I said earlier, it's a movie that sticks to the universe that it has created and doesn't break that universe. And I think that is kind of rare these days. And so it's a nice thing to be able to go back to. I think it's going to remain a classic and remain rewatchable going forward. And when my kids are old enough, I will watch this with them. One of the things that prevented me from watching this in recent times was because I had the kids, just me and them for the past 2 nights, because my wife has been going to a evening class to learn how to, not learn how, but to be certified to homeschool. And I didn't think that I could watch this movie with them, unfortunately. So that's why I am being the negative Nelly on this, as far as not having a whole lot to contribute. But I think it is a good movie, and I do highly recommend it. But I can't really give it a score. So I know. We're going to be missing out on my made up number on this one, but it was a really good discussion with you guys, and so I appreciate Doc you coming on and talking about this. And we'd love to have you back sometime in the future. I know that you're big on the Stephen King and the lore around that, so maybe we could get into something about that. You were on
Thank you very much.
2 years ago for It, and It 2 is coming out. I don't know if it'll be worthy of discussion, but maybe at some point. And Robert, I think next week we're going to do a bit of a reversal. We're going to go from this semi-wholesome film to a straight Outta Compton film. So we're going to do the exact opposite of what Ice Cube did, where he went from a very rough situation and then started making family movies. Well, we're going to go from a family movie into a bit of a rougher movie. And we're going to have the Afrolibertarian come on and join us for that one next week.
Ooh, cool.
Fun stuff. Yeah, the original, the biography of NWA made what? I don't know, it was like 10 years ago now?
2015. But, I think they call it a biopic.
Biopic.
4 years ago. From what I hear, I didn't hear a whole lot of griping from the original members of NWA, so I assume that the story is fairly accurate. So, should be good.
Indeed, sir. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it'll be fun, and I do promise to watch this one. And there is an extended director's cut version by F. Gary Gray, and so I think that will be the one that I watch. And I'll make that available to you, Robert, so that we can both have watched the film for next week. And I think we'll have a little bit more relevant content related specifically to the film that's a little bit different than what we did for tonight. But Doc Brown, thank you for bringing your analysis and some of the background, especially regarding the DeLorean. That was really interesting stuff. And the drug war did really screw that up. And we'll be harping on the drug war, I'm sure, a fair amount next week.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. I'm honored, as always, to be with two amazing superstars. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You're a legend.
Well, thanks again. And thank our audience. This is available at lastnighters.com/88 and also on thelaunchpadmedia.com. Show notes and more will be on both of those pages. And I do wish you guys to join us next week for Straight Outta Compton. Peace out, everyone. Good night from last night.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.